Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of 0 to 60. Now, hopefully you can see it, but we have the 325 in the shed and we're trying to work on the issue with the little engine stutter it had. If you haven't been following along, this car, we bought it back in Christmas, sold it to one of our friends, and they are experiencing an intermittent issue with like a stutter when you accelerate, or sometimes when you're sitting at traffic lights, the idle will just be rough. Got it in. I thought it was going to be the plugs that were in there, but it turns out it actually threw a fault code for the small DISA valve, which is the DISA valve just on this side of the intake. And doing a bit of Googling, it looks like that can actually cause the symptoms. I'll put a video in. I actually took it for a drive before I brought it in the shed to try and capture it doing it, but it was pretty much perfect apart from one roll-on, which I'll play here, and you can just see the rev counter just judder around a little bit. So yeah, that's all it's doing. So just low RPMs. If you load it up, it'll stutter. I'm gonna basically swap that DISA valve. This is the one here. We've got a new aftermarket one we're gonna try. They were about 100 Aussie dollars. So I've never actually taken an N52 intake manifold off. I'm gonna work out how to do that, and I'll update you guys once I have some progress. All right, so I better give you guys an update. So I got the intake manifold off, which was relatively easy. It was just a matter of doing the intake, take the throttle body off, unclip the wiring box, and then unclip all of the vacuum lines, I suppose they're called. So that one actually went to the throttle body. There were these two vacuum line connectors here that went to the intake manifold. I removed the brake line, or the brake booster vacuum line, which come all the way over there. Then unclip all of the electronics. That's the throttle body, the two DISA valves, and there was another sensor on the PCV or something. And then the wiring to the 202 sensors, and then the bolts for the intake manifold, and she did come straight off. Now I had what's caused me a bit of a delay. It's more broken than I was expecting. The intake manifold was pretty damn full of oil. Now I've got a feeling that's going to be an issue with the PCV valve, which sits down in there. So we might have to get another PCV or CCV valve organized. For now, I'm going to clean that out as well as I can. But what threw me off, I had the fault code for this DISA valve, so I ordered the new one. And as we can see here, the flapper is not working, not connected to anything. But the large DISA valve, which I've had over here, was also not working, and I didn't have one of these. Now, the issue with it is, it was actually the same as the other one. The flap was not connected to the gear inside. All I've done, I've taken this one apart, cleaned all the oil out. It was also full of oil, and I think that's what causes the problem. And I've just used some thread tape to get the shaft that goes through the center of the valve to actually lock in. And I don't want to pull it apart, but yeah, I've just used normal thread tape, and now we actually have quite a good connection. And I think that's going to be fine to go back in the intake manifold. To get the DISA valve apart, all I did was split it with, I started cutting it with a blade, and then I hammered in a flat screwdriver, and it's come apart. I'm going to have to clean up these edges to get it to reseal, but before we do that, I better clean all of the oil out of everything, put some new grease on the gears, and we'll put it back together. I'm going to basically put it all back in, reassemble it. I'll time-lapse the reassembly so you can see how it goes back together. And now I know what I'm doing, and I will install this new DISA valve here. Then we'll take it for a test drive and see if it's any better. Shut up, Siri. Okay guys, I'm gonna get in the car so you can hear me all right, but a few days have passed and we had a few issues sorting this out. Now, I just sort of get in the car, and the reason there's been a bit of a delay, basically I was doing the work on Monday night and had a few problems. When I put the car back together after that last clip that you've just seen, I went to start it for the first time and the engine long cranked. When it long cranked, I didn't think much of it. I thought it's probably lost fuel pressure, and then basically it revved quite well actually. Not bad, but it was revving okay. Anyway, buttoned up the rest of the engine, ended up putting the car on charge for a little while, and then went to start it again, and it's still long cranked. And I'm sitting in here thinking, what the hell's going on? I've probably got a vacuum leak or something. Went round to have a look while it was running, and I could hear a whistling sound. The whistling sound was coming from the oil cap. There was a huge amount of vacuum at the oil cap. Now, again, at that point, I'm thinking, well, obviously I've left something off and the PCV system or the CCV system is not working properly at all, or maybe an issue with these DISA valves. Now that the DISA valves are functioning and actually opening and closing, it's putting too much load on the CCV. Long story short, and it took me well over an hour to work this out, the cam sensor wire had come loose. So obviously when I've taken the intake manifold off and undone the electronics box, or moved the electronics box away from the throttle body, I just loosened off the cam sensor, sorry, the crank sensor. And believe it or not, these actually run fairly well without a crank sensor. They long crank, but what was really throwing me off was the vacuum in the valve cover. Yeah, so with the crank sensor disconnected, you get long cranks and a heap of vacuum in the valve cover. So much vacuum that I couldn't actually undo the oil cap. Now, unfortunately, because of the delay it took me to do that, this car needed to go back to its owner, and I ended up just rushing. I didn't get to film everything properly, and I started to doubt my work. With the crank sensor connected, the car started, and it actually revved really good. It revved much better than it ever has before. Took it for a test drive, though, and as soon as I come to a stop at the lights just around the corner, the car was still shuddering. Took it back, fitted the set of plugs, the new plugs, the Bosch double platinum plugs instead of the standard plugs that were in it, and it got a little bit better, but it still didn't feel right. I ended up using DISA to do a rough running test, and it was showing rough running on cylinder 6. Now we know we've just changed the plugs, and I ended up just putting one of the old N54 coils onto cylinder 6, but I'm guessing the ignition coils on this car are also coming to the end of their time, because as soon as I changed that coil, the rough running values in DISA were all pretty similar. So I had to leave it at that. Now the car on Monday night, at that point, with cylinder 6 coil changed, it ran really well, revved really fast, but I didn't have time to test drive it. I had to go back to the owner. I knew it was going to be okay. We were definitely going to be better. So today, I want to actually just take it for a proper test drive with you guys and make sure we fix the problem. It's been a bit of a weird one. One thing I will say, the DISA valves have 100% increased the way that this car goes through its revs. But I'll just start it up right now. It just long cranked then. Weird. We'll just assume it's an anomaly. But yeah, the car is at running temperature. It's just been dropped off for me to finish this video for the next hour, so I'll just rev it. Like, that revs so much faster than it used to. All right, let's take it for a test drive and just make sure it is going to be smooth and conclude fixing this, even though it wasn't just the single problem I thought it was. All right, let's go for a bit of a drive. Hopefully the aircon doesn't cause too much issues with the microphone. In fact, I'll close that vent. Yeah, what threw me off, I didn't need to undo the crank sensor when I took the intake manifold off. It was just that it was one of the sensors that hides underneath the starter motor. So I'm down in that area, but you can't actually see it when you look down from the top. And yeah, the plug had just pulled out a little bit. The plug was actually still in the sensor. It just wasn't tight on the prongs, and yeah, enough to cause a little bit of confusion for a while. And yeah, I certainly learned something. So driving it now, I've actually just reset the litres per 100, the fuel economy, and we'll see what this now averages on a gentle drive now that the DISA valves are fixed. I was quite surprised to see both DISA valves with a problem. From what I was reading, the heavy juddering that this had at the traffic lights is pretty much guaranteed to be caused by the small DISA valve. And I guess because the way that both of these DISA valves had failed, they could be, I suppose depending on what the engine's doing, they may be closed or open. They were basically just loose on the spindles of the DISA valve. Pain in the backside. But the aftermarket one was pretty cheap, and it seems to be functioning a lot better now, although I've probably learned I could have repaired them pretty easily if I wanted to go that route. So we've just accelerated up a hill. No, not accelerated, but we're driving up a hill, and no stuttering from the engine at all. What I might do, I'll turn the camera off and we'll get round to a smoother, quieter section of road so we can actually pay a bit more attention to what the engine's doing. Okay, and we'll drop it down so it's right in the low RPM range, and we'll go flat out, and it just accelerates. I mean, it doesn't accelerate rapidly, but it does accelerate. That's pretty conclusive, because I've just done that a few times off camera, to be honest, and also the owner said it doesn't stutter anymore, that we have finally fixed the problem. But it wasn't just the DISA valves. Yeah, all right, I'm gonna keep driving and we'll see how our fuel economy averages out over the rest of this trip. So we're at just over 80 kilometers an hour in 6th gear. Accelerate on. Yeah, the motor feels very, very smooth right now. I think we're good. We are good. I'm going to leave it in 6th gear and we'll just see how it copes with a low RPM. Well, the low RPMs, I should say, but I'm pretty confident we've sorted this thing out. Now that is the average fuel consumption that I reset just before we left the house. Oh, so we're at 1100 RPM, still in 6th, sort of pulling up a hill. Yeah, no stutters. It is so much more drivable. That's good. Yeah, before I could basically get it to misfire. I was trying to make it misfire sort of around the 15 to 1600 RPM, but now mash the throttle, it just works it out. That's pretty good. And fuel economy has definitely increased. This car was averaging around, I think about 9.9. It might be visible at the start of this video. I'll have to go back and check. But around 9.9 litres per 100. And I've just been driving it on this test drive. I'm not driving it economically or anything. And we're not hypermiling, and we're not doing 100 k's an hour. We're sort of around town type driving. So fuel economy is better, which I believe is part of the DISA valve. All right. I'm pretty sure we fixed this, although I might recommend to the owner maybe looking into some replacement coils, because if one's gone, I'm sure others will be on their way out soon as well. All right, I'm gonna head back home and I'll give you a proper outro when we get back to the house. But this car was a little bit more challenging than I was expecting. And we're back, and it ended up averaging 7.6 litres per 100. Again, I wasn't hypermiling it or anything. Yeah, so to summarise, if you've got an N52 with the N52 B25, so the 2.5 litre, make sure you check your DISA valves. Both of them were damaged on this car, but it was only throwing an error for the small one. And I guess because it was a mechanical error, the ECU wouldn't have known that the large flap wasn't reacting when it should react. The electronic motor would open and close, but the flap wouldn't. But I guess it's also a pretty common issue on these for the flaps to completely fall off. So yeah, if you're into a bit of DIY, taking the intake manifold off is super easy. You've got to, it's basically part of changing a starter motor on one of these, so it's not a complicated thing to do. Doesn't take very long. Yeah, check your DISA valves. You can repair them if they've just come loose like the big one. And yeah, I literally just wedged some tape, basically just change the size of the rod on the DISA valve to make it grab onto the plastic part of the DISA valve a little bit tighter. Just spaced it out with some thread tape, which went in there nice and tight, and yeah, everything could still move freely enough. But yeah, it was a bit of a, it ended up being a 4-hour job instead of a 1-hour job, but that was probably my fault with disconnecting the crank signal. Yeah, other things to note, if you have got a misfire, I would actually say throw, I'm going to say it, and I'm always a bit of a tight ass, but it makes quite a big difference on one of these. Throw a full set of plugs and coils at it. If you've got the money, just go genuine. I have used aftermarket coils on Mark's 325, and they were fine. They were the cheap sort of $70 for a full set of aftermarket coils. But yeah, obviously it's going to make a difference. This car now drives just like Mark's. I didn't really pick up on it because I didn't get to drive it much when we owned it back at Christmas time. It was all sort of testing and making sure it wasn't leaking oil. I didn't actually drive it far. The owner ended up driving it to get the roadworthy, and they drove it back, but they did say it stuttered every now and again. Look, I'll end it off there. I've nattered on long enough. Tomorrow we do have an update on O'Reilly. We've got some new street tyres to go and test, and we're thinking about doing 8th mile drags this weekend in O'Reilly as well. So there's a fair bit happening. I know it's been a quiet week, but yeah, finally got this thing running how it should, and we will get this back hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and we'll do a proper 0 to 60 on it now. It's finally sorted. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.